So today is October the 24th, 2015, and we're doing a little interview with Graham, better known as Carmen Acton. And Mom, let's start off, and the interviewer is her second oldest son, Don. And so we're going to start off with, tell me when you were born.
August the 22nd, 1931.
1931. And what was the name of your parents?
Mildred and Kermit Hayes.
Okay. And then where were you born?
Newcastle, Indiana.
Newcastle, Indiana. Where were your parents from?
Well, not sure which is which. One's from Hartford City, Indiana, and the other one's from Montpelier, Indiana. But I think my dad was Hartford City and my mother was Montpelier.
And then who were your grandparents? Do you remember them?
Ashford, and that's my grandfather. And this is hard. I knew my grandparents pretty well. That was Abe and, I really can't remember. Abe was my mother's father.
Campbell, right?
Yeah, Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
It was pronounced Camel.
Camel.
They never said Campbell. It was Camel.
Okay. You don't remember where they were from and what their
Hartford
names
City
were?
and Montpelier.
Okay.
I don't know which is which.
So you were born in Muncie, or in Newcastle, Indiana, and tell me what you remember about your family home that you grew up in.
We moved to Muncie when I was 3.
Okay.
And I can remember the Newcastle home because my dad, I was a cute little girl, and my dad always picked me up and threw me up in the air, and he hit my head on the ceiling one night. I always will remember that. But we moved to Muncie when I was probably a little over 3, wasn't 4 yet, a little over 3. And that's where I lived for several years of my life.
Uh-huh. And the home you grew up in Muncie, can you describe that a little?
The one I lived till I was 3, or the one?
No, the one in Muncie.
Well, I lived in Muncie that's right, I lived in Newcastle till I was 3. Okay, first we moved over on Main Street when I was 3 years old. We lived there until, I was probably a 4th grader. It made me 9 or something, so around there, 9 or 10. And then we moved over on Charles Street in Muncie, and I lived there till I got married.
Okay. What's your best memory in your early childhood? Can you think of anything that really stands out when you were a little girl?
Actually not, because my father was mean to my mother.
Uh-huh.
And those are memories.
And he was mean to your mother. Was he an alcoholic?
He was an alcoholic, but if you understand this term, he was a sober alcoholic. He worked every day of his life at Chrysler. He was never a sloppy drunk, a funny drunk. He was a mean drunk.
Uh-huh.
And he lived on whiskey. A whiskey bottle was always in the pantry. And he was mean to my mother. That's what I remember. I hated
From early
him.
childhood.
Yeah, I hated him.
Yeah. And then what about, and when did he leave your mother, or when did your mother leave him?
Well, no, he left my mother because my mother wouldn't leave him. She just asked her when I was older why she didn't leave my dad, because I had no respect for him. And she said, I always knew he would just wear himself down and he would walk out. And he probably would have killed my mother had she left him. He probably would have. He was a mean man.
Mm-hmm. So what age were you when he left?
11.
11. And was that a good thing, a bad thing?
It was a great day.
Uh-huh.
Before he left for good, he'd left several times, but he always came back. But before he left for good, he gathered my mother and my brother and me and set us around the living room. And then he sat down and bent over and crossed his legs, and he said, I just ought to kill all of you. And believe me, it scared me to death. And my mother never locked the door, and that night he walked out, and I had a front bedroom that had French windows clear across the front. And I sat on the edge of my bed all night looking out those windows because my dad never pulled away. He sat out there and smoked. And I was scared to death. But my mother wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah, so then in your teen years, so he wasn't around as you were a teenager. What was some of your best memories being a teenager?
Being free of him was one of the best ones. I could go home and he wouldn't have just hit my mother, or, I could open that door in ease knowing my father wasn't there, and to see my mother happy. And those were probably good years.
Uh-huh. And you mentioned your brother. What was your brother's name?
Diamond.
And how much age difference?
He was 4 years older than me.
4 years older than me.
Almost to the day.
And how did he get along with your father?
Not good. I watched my father slap him down to the floor one day when he was a teenager, and he was hitting my mother, and my brother stepped in front of my mother, and he just took hold of my brother's collar and just slapped him from side to side till he hit the floor.
Mm-hmm. So, other things in your teen years, what do you remember that was about your school or best friends? What were your favorite pastimes? Or
Well, I had good friends. I was one of 12 friends. We had a lot of good times. Our main pastime was going to the teen canteen and dancing all evening. That was Friday and Saturday night. Those were my favorite things to do back then. And then we had a local swimming pool called Toohey's Pool, and they had a jukebox, and we could go there and dance too, and that we did.
Mm-hmm. So, what were your best subjects in school?
Well,
What did you like to study? Were you a good student?
No, I was not. That's not a good question. No, I got through on C's and a few D's. No, I was not a good student. I didn't know how to study. I don't know. I just wasn't a good I wasn't a poor student, but I also was not a good student.
And did your mother encourage you to be a good student, or did
No,
she care at all?
She never said anything. She always
Yeah, she
looked at
didn't
my
really.
report card. I always passed. I did get a couple of B's here and there,
Uh-huh.
but not a lot. Basically, I was a C student.
And your mother, how far did she go in school?
My dad went to 6th grade. My mother must have gone to 8th grader.
To 8th grade. And your mother was kind of a businesswoman,
Oh,
right?
she was a businesswoman, not kind of.
In what way?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean in what way.
Well, how was she a businesswoman?
She was smart. My mother was smart.
Did she have a business?
Yes, she ran her own business. She had
What
what
was
was
it?
called the North Elm Street store. Started out as a kind of a drugstore. And it was just shortly after that she put a counter in, and they just served like hamburgers and something to drink. And I think she had ice cream. I used to work out there. And then she wasn't open very long, and then she married who was now my stepfather. She married him, and he was a cook, and his mother helped him, and they started like a blue plate special every day. They had a different special, and the people really flocked in. Her store was close to Malibu, where men came in filthy, dirty, and Ball brother businessmen would sit side by side on the stool. It was really something to see. She served good food.
And what was your stepfather's name?
Byron Keeler.
Uh-huh. And was he a good guy, or?
He was a wonderful guy. I loved him dearly.
Mm-hmm. And then, how old were you when you met Dad?
Oh, Dad. I was 14.
14. How did you meet him?
That's interesting. Let me think. He had quit school and joined the paratroopers, and on his first, I don't know if it was his first furlough, but he came to the teen canteen, and I saw him standing there. Of course, he had his uniform on, and I remembered him from high school because junior high school, because he had flunked math, and the high school was downtown, junior high was that, and he came down to get a ninth grade credit that he had missed. And I worked for the office. I picked up attendance cards at one period every day. And he sat in the back, and I was quite smitten with him because I knew about him for sure, who he was, and I loved to pick up those cards and stand there and look at him. And he'd look at me and smile.
And how did you know about him?
Well, he was a ball player
Uh,
for our basketball team. Everybody knew who Marion Acton was.
so he was he was one of the top athletes in school, huh?
You know, he was definitely.
Okay. And then tell us about your from there, how long about your courtship, marriage?
You really want to know all about that, huh?
Yeah.
Well, the courtship was, he had no money. There was no courtship. We go up to the teen canteen, and he would walk me home. And that actually was, I don't think we actually ever had a date. A date. He had no money. He was from the poor side of town, and he had no money. And no, we actually didn't date. A date was him coming over to my house. We would play cards, and I do remember one night we played cards, and we had the radio on. We didn't have TV back then, guys. And we had the radio on. That came on the radio that William Acton had died. He had died at the mission home. And Marion looked at me and he says, "That's my dad." And I had never heard him talk about his father, ever. But it was his father. It was.
Mm-hmm. And he died at a mission home?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so did your mother get along with him well?
With Marion's
Uh-huh.
father?
No.
Well, did his mother?
Did
Yeah.
your mother get along with Marion well?
Oh, yeah, she liked Marion. Oh, she thought he was just wonderful because when the year he was in the service, he started writing me letters. And I always let Mom read them. And she was so impressed with him. It wasn't even funny. She thought he was great.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote nice letters.
And did you get along with his mom?
Yeah, she was totally different. I mean, his family life was totally different than my family life.
Mm-hmm.
Totally different. His mother worked in a factory and just lived out in the black section, and she wasn't a horrible housekeeper, but she was not a good housekeeper. Their home was just a home where I grew up in a very nice home. My mother was a good housekeeper, always looked nice, and so our backgrounds were totally different there, totally.
Mm-hmm. So then tell us about getting married.
Well, I was like 14 when I met Marion, and like I say, we never really dated. He'd come over to my house, we'd play cards, and I don't know, he didn't have any money, that's why we didn't date. And anyway, that's how I met him. I'd see him in high school, and most of the girls had crushes on the boy players. That wasn't unusual to have a crush on a boy. And but he looked at me as an innocent girl, somebody that hadn't been around, and that's what he liked.
Mm-hmm. So then, when did you get married?
Well, when I was 16 and 3 months pregnant.
Uh-huh.
He liked the innocent part, and I started dating him when I was, what you call a date wasn't a date like you guys would have today. Like I said, he came over to my house and we played cards. But he started coming over when I was 14, and he probably came over 2 or 3 nights a week. And it was like that for probably well over a year. And of course, he always tried to get fresh with me, but I always said no. But he wore me down. He did. And I got pregnant then when I was 16.
Uh-huh. And when you got pregnant, how did that go over with your mother?
Well, I got kicked out.
Uh-huh.
I remember a friend of mine told my mother I was pregnant. And she didn't get home from work till 10 o'clock at night. And I was always in bed, and I had a front bedroom right by the front door. And I always read for a while, and I was reading when Mom came in, and she turned and looked at me, and I could tell she'd been crying, and I knew exactly what had happened. I knew. And she walked right into me, and she was really, needless to say, she was really angry, really, really angry. And she told me, she says, "You get out of here and you get married before the weekend." And so she went upstairs and went to bed. I waited for a while till I knew she was asleep. I called Marion, and he lived clear across town. And so I told him what had happened, and I called a cab, and they took me out there, and I never went back home. That was it. And we got married. That was Tuesday, and we were married Saturday.
But if she wanted you to get married and you did, then...
Well, as she later told me, she didn't mean that I should get married that way. But I said, "Well, Mom, you gave me no choice. You told me to get married." So I did. And of course we had to lie about our age. We went to Hartford City, and my aunt lived in Hartford City, and about a week later she called my mom, and she says, "I saw Carmen's marriage license in the paper," and so she wanted to know all about it.
Was she happy that you got married? Or?
Oh, she loved me. She did. No, she never said anything.
So then you guys got married, and when was it? August?
August the 7th.
1948.
48.
And you were 16?
And Marion was 19.
16 and 19. And so then...
and by the way, when you got married then, you were out of school. There was no going to school and being married. You were done. So we were done with school.
So both of you were done with school. Now, had he got his high school diploma at that point?
No, he had one. He went back to high school because he'd been in the service. He really only needed one credit to graduate, but he wanted to play ball, so he took the whole year, made use of it, so he could play ball. But he only needed one credit, and he took a test after we got married.
And while he was in high school, he had a child?
No.
No.
Well, no, because we quit school. We didn't have any child while we were in school.
Okay, but I thought you said he went back to school and got the one
he quit
credit.
and joined the service. He was a paratrooper.
Right, but then after he came back from the service, that is when you got married.
Well, he came back and he went to high school.
Okay.
He was going to take advantage of getting that one credit.
So
to
when
play
you
ball.
got married, did he have his high school diploma?
No.
He got his high school diploma after you were married.
Yes, and he took a test. I forget what they call it. There was a name for it.
Yeah, okay. So then you went on to have 3 more children?
I did.
And so yeah, your second son, me, was born a year.
Well, Dan was born.
Dan was born in
just
January.
6 months after we got married. And then it was 2 more years. Well,
January
like
of
49.
49.
Yeah, January 49, and Don was born in 51.
50.
December
of 50.
In 50, but there was really almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years.
Danny was the 1st of January, and Don was the end of December.
The 1st of December. And then you had Denise.
3 years later.
3 years later, and then Dell was
2.5 years.
2.5 years later. So you ended up having 4 children. Okay. So when you got married, I mean, how was that being a parent?
Well, I wanted to get married.
I
was all for getting married.
Mm-hmm.
I loved Marion, and I wasn't a good student in high school because once I met him, quite frankly, I didn't care about high school. I wanted to get married.
You thought that was going to be it?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
But in order to get married, I had to get pregnant.
So how did that work out then? That did you regret later that you didn't study harder or do something in school?
No, well, the only time I regretted it is after I had 4 children and my 2 older sons were in high school. Then I went back and got that I hadn't graduated. I had Marion was a principal of a junior high school, and they were short on substitutes, and he needed substitutes. So the I forget superintendent of school told Marion, oh, he hired me a couple times just because he couldn't find anybody to be a sub. So I was down at the school subbing, and then they made a rule that no one could work in the school system unless they were a high school graduate. Well, I wasn't. So Marion had to go tell them that I wasn't a high school graduate. But they really liked me, all the kids liked me, but so anyway, I went back to school. I went back to high school as a student and graduated.
And that was when your oldest son was a junior in high school, right?
And you were in middle school.
I was in middle school.
Yeah.
I was in middle school. I was 2 years behind him, so if he was a junior, I was a freshman.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Uh-huh.
Well, you'd remember, not me.
So the high school had about 300 students.
I don't recall they had that many.
Yeah,
It
and
was a
you
small
were
high
you were a
school.
full-time student
I
as a
went-
senior,
I
and
went as a full-time student.
Yeah.
And the kids all accepted me. Had no problem.
yeah.
But I meant probably the first week I went to school, Danny and his buddies were walking down the hall, and it was a small hallway, and they were coming toward me, and I was just all smiles to say hi to Danny, and Danny got all embarrassed and ignored me. Rather hurt. But he apologized later. His buddies were making funny. There's your mom, and he got embarrassed.
Yeah. Not many people went to high school with their mom.
That's true.
Well, let's change the subject then a little bit. When you were growing up, did you ever attend church?
Only on special days when, I don't know, I did, but there was a church right around the corner from our house. So, yeah, on special times I went. Yes, I did, but it was very seldom. I
Yeah.
did get a Bible. I still have that Bible. I got a Bible, and but it was very rarely did I go. Very rarely.
Yeah. So tell me about how you were introduced to who Jesus was and
And what? Okay. Well, we had moved by then to the Fountain, Indiana, and Marion had just graduated from college, and so and our school was right across the street from where we lived, and so anyway, there was another new teacher that year in school with Marion, so they had get-togethers, and so she and I, the wives, were kind of thrown in together just from new school functions. But I didn't care for her because I counted her. She was very high class, and she just did things that I didn't do. I was a little self-righteous then, I guess. So I really didn't care for her, even though we were thrown together. Well, about a month. No, see, it was in January. We'd started school in September. It was in January. She came knocking on my door one Monday morning, and she says, "I've got something to tell you." Well, I hardly knew her, and I said, "Well, let's sit down." So she told me. And she says, this is Monday morning, she says, "Carmen, I got saved last night." And I said, "You what?" And she said, "I got saved." And I said, "Well, I don't know what that means." And then she proceeded to tell me she had asked Jesus to come into her heart. She had never heard the gospel either. It was all brand new to her. And so she told me what happened to her. I sat there in awe. I've never heard anything like this in my life. So, but after she told me, she says, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, I like what you told me, but I don't really understand at all." So she left, and that was that until the following Sunday. And in about 9, we were watching the Loretta Young show. The kids were all in bed. I just had 3 children then, and they were in bed. And knock, knock, knock on the door. It was 9 or 9:30 at night. Excuse me. I opened the door and I said, "Joanne, what are you doing here?" Because remember, I knew her, but I didn't really know her. And she said, well, I was just driving by and thought I'd stop by. I said, well, come on in. I said, we're watching Loretta Young. And so we went in and we sat down, but she didn't sit there more than 2 minutes. And she says, can we go out in the kitchen and have a cup of coffee? I said, well, sure. So we went out in the kitchen, and Marion was sitting in the living room with his back to us. So the kitchen door was right there, but his back was to us. And so I fixed her coffee, and we sat there talking. And she said, I've got something I want to tell you. And oh wow, I thought, well, okay, what is it? And she proceeded to tell me that the week before, she had invited Jesus into her heart. And she said, you have a Bible? And I said, well, I think somewhere. And so I remembered it was in a drawer in the bedroom that I had received at the Friends Church when I was just a little girl. And it was still in the box, never been used, but I went in and got it, and I handed it to her. Now, mind you, she'd only been saved 3 weeks, but she took that Bible and just started leafing through it, reading a scripture here and there. And all of a sudden, I just started sobbing, and I mean sobbing. And she stood up and put her hand on my shoulder, and she says, Carmen, do you want to ask Jesus into your heart? And I said, well, the tears were just flowing. And I said, well, yes, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know what you're talking about. And she said, just ask him to come in. And that's exactly, I just said, come in, Jesus. And it just, in a moment of time, my whole life changed, and I knew it. It was like a light came down from heaven and just glowed over me. And I knew it's just like I was gone this way, and I turned around and went this way. My whole life changed in an instant of time. And she prayed with me, and by then it was, I think, 11:30 at night, January the 30th, when I received the Lord. And anyway, she had to go because, her kids were home in bed and her husband was there. So she left, and Marion had already gone to bed. No, I take that back. He was still sitting in that chair. But I couldn't tell him anything because I really didn't know what had happened. But anyway, we went to bed, and the whole week I didn't tell him. I was afraid, but basically because I didn't know how to tell him. But finally I did tell him. I don't know whether it was the next week or maybe another week. I did tell him, and he got very angry, and he didn't like it at all. And he took his blankets and he didn't sleep with me for over a week. He was mad. And, I couldn't, well, I guess I knew why, but I didn't have any understanding of it at all. And finally he came back, and we went on with life, and, and I really started going to church. It was a Methodist church. Of course, they didn't teach the word in any way, shape, or form. The preacher preached out of the Reader's Digest. But I started reading my Bible, and Marion, if he'd see me reading my Bible, he would get very angry. He did not like it, so I learned to kind of do it in hiding. And he was refereeing about that at that time. And probably, I don't know how much time had passed, but he came home one night. Of course, he never got home till 11 o'clock and sometimes midnight. But I was sitting, kids were in bed, and I was sitting there reading my Bible, and he pulled up in front. Well, I closed my Bible and laid it on the table because I knew he didn't like it. And he came in and just sat down on the end of the couch close to me. He looked over and saw that Bible, and he just bent over and he said, I just ought to kill you and the kids and get it over with. And of course it put fear in me. It really scared me because I knew he was angry about it. But we went to bed, and of course he never talked about that again, but that night it really scared me. But anyway, Marion didn't get saved for a year and a half. And I had a good friend that started witnessing to him, and he told her once, right shortly before I got saved, although when I count he got saved is different than what he counts, because he got saved but he didn't tell anybody, and I only knew that much later. But he just, I don't know, he just didn't want to tell anybody. We were going to church, we were going to that Methodist church, and he was even teaching a Sunday school class. And he told the kids one day, he told me this later, he said he told him that if God ever wanted him, God would just have to knock him over. I forget exactly what he said, but to knock him over. And so that's how he felt about it. And sure enough, I didn't know it. And but anyway, my life changed drastically. It was never the same.
And how do you, when you say your life changed drastically, give me an example of
Well, it was
what
an
changed.
inward change. I mean, the thoughts. I was totally a different person. That's all.
In
I
what
can
way?
say. Well, I don't know because we really. I mean, we didn't have a lot of money then, so we really weren't in the world doing a lot of things the world does that would take money because we didn't have money. Uh, I can't really answer that, Dawn. My heart, I guess the things that I used to think and want, it was no longer there. It was no longer there. I started reading my Bible regularly, and my life just totally changed. Totally.
Okay. So, when the time comes and you're no longer here, and you think about now you have 4 children. How many grandchildren?
19 grandchildren, and one's with the Lord. That's Luker.
And how many great-grandchildren?
I don't think I've ever. I think I counted it up once, but a lot of them.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to have to do that.
Okay.
And I know I did do it once, but that was quite a while ago.
Well, someday your grandchildren will have grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but, years from now, when your offspring that will never have even met you and know nothing about you, what would you like them to know about you, and what you thought or what you found was important in your life?
Well, I can answer that with 3 words: the Lord Jesus Christ. It's the most important thing in my life because He changed me completely in a moment of time. My life was never the same, never. And of course, I grew. When I first become to know the Lord, I had a lot of growing to do. And that's, as far as that goes, I still have to grow in the Lord. I will always have to grow in the Lord. And you just can't take for granted, oh, well, He saved me, now I can do what I want to do. I don't feel that way at all, although the day I was saved, I am saved for eternity. I didn't know that for a long time. I thought every time I did something wrong, I lost my salvation. And put fear in me because I didn't want to lose my salvation, but I felt when I sinned, I did. But, through getting into the Word, and then also we got into a sound church that the pastor really preached just the Word of God, and I really got grounded in the Word of God, and I knew I was saved for all eternity. And if I sinned, God forgave me, and I never lost my salvation again. I can't lose it. I know that now.
And so now, you're how old?
I'm 84.
84 years old. And what do you look forward to right now in your life?
Well, wow. I hate to say I look forward to death because I don't really mean that. But I do know that I'm closer to death than I've ever been before. And I do know the minute I close my eyes in death, I am with the Lord for all eternity. I know that. In all my heart, I will be with the Lord. And what I hope that I know all my children are saved. I'm not sure all my grandchildren are saved. But I hope at my funeral, the word will be preached. And there will be like an invitation given. I want that. Because I want all of my family, all of them, to know the Lord. And I think those who may be resisting now at my funeral, because I do want the word preached at my funeral, and I want my children to give a testimony, and I pray that every one of my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, will all come to know the Lord. I pray that with all my heart.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I'm just thankful, Don, that you've given me this opportunity. That my family, when you play this after I'm gone, that they will know exactly where I stood. That I was saved, and I wasn't saved by good works because I didn't have good works. Remember, I was a young girl who got pregnant at 16. I had no good works. I had nothing good to offer the Lord. I couldn't. Out of His mercy and His grace, He chose me and He saved me. And my life changed for all eternity. I was never the same. So, and I want all of you, everyone that has my blood in them and their mates, I want you to come to know the Lord. That's very important to me. And it's the difference between eternity with you. If you know the Lord when you die, you will be in heaven for all eternity. If you die and don't know the Lord, you will be in hell for all eternity. And that's not good. Don't fool yourself. Don't fool yourself. You will be in hell if you don't receive the Lord as your Savior. He alone can save you. No one else can. It's by His blood.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.